There is an ancient figure that, for centuries, was considered too dangerous for traditional religion. A god who does not represent only good, but neither does he represent only evil. A god who contains both. That god's name is Abraxas, and according to the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, this symbol could reveal one of the deepest secrets of the human mind. Because Abraxas represents something most people do not want to accept, that within us opposing forces exist, light and darkness, creativity and destruction, love and aggression, compassion and selfishness. Most of us would prefer to believe we are simple, that we are consistent, that we are basically good. But Jung believed that this image of ourselves is, to a large extent, an illusion, and that understanding ancient symbols like Abraxas can help us see something much deeper about human nature. For thousands of years, many religions have attempted to organize the universe in a simple way: God versus the devil, good versus evil, light versus darkness. This moral structure has an obvious advantage. It provides clarity. It allows us to orient ourselves in the world. It tells us what we should do, what we should avoid, and who our allies or enemies are. But Carl Gustav Jung observed something unsettling. Human psychology does not function that simply. People are neither entirely good nor entirely evil. Within every individual, there is a complex mixture of contradictory impulses. We can be deeply generous one moment and surprisingly selfish the next. We can love intensely and at the same time feel resentment. We are capable of acts of great kindness and also of behaviors that shame us. This ambiguity is a fundamental part of the human condition. However, many cultures have tried to deny this complexity. They have preferred to divide the world into clear categories: the pure and the impure, the right and the wrong, the sacred and the profane. For Jung, this attempt to simplify human nature has profound psychological consequences, because when we try to deny certain parts of ourselves, those parts do not disappear. They simply go into hiding. To understand how Jung arrived at these ideas, we must look at his work as an investigator of the human soul. Unlike many psychologists of his time, Jung did not limit himself to studying only the modern mind. He became deeply interested in history, mythology, alchemy, ancient religions, and the symbols that appeared across different cultures. What he discovered was startling. Civilizations that had never had contact with one another used remarkably similar symbols. Serpents representing wisdom or transformation, heroes descending into the underworld, dragons guarding treasures, divine figures uniting opposites. These coincidences were too numerous to be accidental. This led to Jung's formulating one of his most influential ideas, the collective unconscious. According to Jung, in addition to our personal unconscious, made up of forgotten or repressed memories, there is a deeper layer shared by all of humanity. This collective unconscious contains universal patterns called archetypes. Archetypes are not concrete images, but symbolic structures that manifest in myths, dreams, and cultural narratives. And among the strangest symbols Jung encountered, a particularly haunting figure appeared: Abraxas. The figure of Abraxas comes from an ancient spiritual tradition called Gnosticism. Gnosticism emerged in the early centuries of our era and offered a radical interpretation of the universe. While many religions described God as a perfect and entirely good being, the Gnostics had a more complex view of reality. For them, the cosmos was full of levels, emanations, and contradictory forces. The universe was not simple. It was mysterious, ambiguous, and deeply symbolic. In some Gnostic texts, Abraxas appears as a supreme figure containing all the forces of the cosmos, not just good, but also evil, not just light,
but also darkness. This idea was deeply uncomfortable for many religious traditions because it suggested that divine reality could not be reduced to a simple morality. Ancient depictions of Abraxas are strange and, at first glance, almost monstrous. He has a human body, the head of a rooster, the legs of a serpent. In one hand, he holds a whip, in the other, a shield. To a modern observer, this combination might seem absurd, but in ancient cultures, hybrid symbols held profound meaning. The human body represents rational consciousness. The rooster's head symbolizes the dawn. The rooster is the animal that announces the arrival of light after the night. The serpent legs represent the primordial instincts of life. The serpent is one of humanity's oldest symbols. It appears in mythologies worldwide and is associated with wisdom, renewal, transformation, and also danger. When all these elements combine into a single figure, the result is an image that unites different levels of existence: instinct and consciousness, darkness and awakening, animality and divinity, exactly the same forces that coexist within the human psyche. When Jung studied this figure, he realized that it was not merely a historical curiosity. To him, Abraxas was an extremely powerful psychological symbol. In 1916, Jung wrote a brief but deeply mysterious text called Septem Sermones et Mortuos, which means the 7 sermons to the dead. Curiously, Jung did not publish this text under his own name. He attributed it to an ancient Gnostic master named Basilides. In that text, an extraordinary statement appears. Abraxas is the God who stands above God and the devil. This phrase may seem provocative, but its meaning is symbolic. Jung was not saying that Abraxas was literally a superior deity. What he was suggesting is that psychic reality is more complex than the simple opposition between good and evil. Abraxas represents a totality that contains both forces. This is where one of the most famous concepts in Jungian psychology appears: the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we prefer not to see: our aggressive impulses, our jealousy, our selfish desires, our deepest fears. These characteristics do not fit the ideal image we have of ourselves. Therefore, we tend to deny them. But denying the shadow doesn't make it go away. It simply pushes it into the unconscious. And what remains in the unconscious can become extremely powerful. When the shadow is not recognized, it usually manifests in indirect ways. Sometimes it appears in sudden emotional outbursts, sometimes in self-destructive behaviors, and often it appears in the form of projection. Projection occurs when we attribute qualities to other people that actually belong to us. Suddenly, evil always seems to be on the outside, in our enemies, in people with different ideologies, in different cultures. But Jung observed that often what we criticize most in others reflects something that exists within ourselves. For Jung, the symbol of Abraxas reminds us of something fundamental. Human wholeness includes both light and darkness. Accepting this does not mean justifying destructive behavior. It means recognizing our complexity. Jung called the process of integrating these parts of the psyche individuation. Individuation is the path towards becoming who we truly are. It is not a path of absolute moral perfection. It is a path of integration. It involves recognizing our contradictions and learning to live with them consciously. At the heart of Jung's psychology exists another important concept: the self. The self represents the totality of the psyche. It is the integration of all opposites, conscious and unconscious, reason and instinct, light and darkness. Many religious symbols, according to Jung, represent this totality: the mandala, the Christ, the philosopher's stone of alchemy, and also Abraxas. Perhaps that's why Jung was so fascinated by this ancient figure, because Abraxas confronts us with an uncomfortable but deeply human truth. We are not simple. We are a mixture of opposing forces. Within us exists both the capacity to create and the capacity to destroy. Psychological maturity does not consist in denying this reality. It consists in recognizing it. and perhaps the true path to self-knowledge begins when we stop fighting our darkness and start to understand it.